Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What an inspiring, enriching, and debateful time that we have shared over the past 3 days together. But it is not over just yet, because I am honored to present our very last speaker of the 2023 Warwick Economics Summit. Our next speaker has been a recognized leader in the United Nations, working across 192 different countries and territories to save children's lives, to defend their rights, and to help them fulfill their potential. This is Henreitta Fore, the 7th Executive Director of UNICEF. From 2007 to 2009, Henrietta served as the Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development. Ms. Fore was the first woman to ever serve in a role of this kind and was responsible for managing over $39 billion annually to support the economic, political, and social futures of disaster victims. Henrietta also served on the boards of numerous domestic and international public corporations, including the Center for Global Development, the Middle East Investment Initiative, and Women Corporate Directors. Ms. Fore was appointed to be the Executive Director of UNICEF by then Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2018, and during this time, she led a $7 billion agency with over 20,000 staff through projects in health, education, sanitation, protection, and many more. Throughout her public service and private sector positions, Ms. Fore has dedicated herself to championing economic development. Interviewing Ms. Henrietta Fore today will be
Well, hello everyone. My name is Nathan and I am the WES Talks Coordinator. I am very privileged today to be here interviewing Miss Henrietta Fore. Are you here, Henrietta?
I am here. Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Serena.
No problem. So just before we start, I would just like to tell the audience that if you would like to submit your questions for our Q&A session, could you please use the link using Slido? Thank you very much. So our first question today will be, Ms. Fore, what are your key priorities when helping children to escape conflict or human rights abuses?
Well, Nathan, and I mentioned that I was in Dubai tonight. And one of the things that is happening here is that everyone is thinking about the children in Turkey and in Syria. And there has been an outpouring of help. So Dubai Cares has had volunteers coming in and packing blankets and food and water and clothing, everything that you might need. So it immediately comes to mind that you want to protecting children, saving their lives, finding them in the rubble is number one. But then you have to protect them enough that you can reunite them with their family. And when you're in emergencies like this, or when you're in a conflict situation where people are fleeing, they often separate a family. So a child will no longer be with their family, and they may not be old enough. They may not remember who their family is, what their names are. They'll know what they looked like. They'll know what they called them, but they won't know their own name, and they are therefore difficult to reunite. So an entity like UNICEF is trying to protect children and young people wherever they are, whenever they're in a crisis. It's either man-made or is a natural crisis. Then the second thing that comes to mind is when I was in Yemen, one of the issues we had were lots of children who were just traumatized by the planes flying overhead and bombs bursting, and that they were running from city, town, village to another one. And mental health becomes a real challenge for everyone. So finding places that are calm, that are inviting, that allow a child to maybe do some drawing so that they can think through their emotions and what they have seen. The mental health aspects of protection are becoming increasingly studied. They're more important than ever, and we're seeing it as more necessary than ever. Conflicts are longer, they are more brutish than they have ever been. So, protection and the ability to sort of put a human life back together again so that they can be part of their community is extremely important.
That's a really interesting insight, and I'm sure that the focus on mental health has only really started to come through in the last decade or so. So it's great that you're putting so much of a focus on that. So moving on to my second question, what are some of the biggest challenges facing young people globally today since the pandemic, and how do you see these challenges developing over the next decade?
So, this is a question, Nathan, for your generation. You know, we haven't had a pandemic like this for several hundred years. So it is a new experience, and especially for a digital generation that can meet virtually. What we hear in countries all over the world is that young people feel a bit depressed, angry, some very despondent because they don't know what lies ahead. They're not sure that there are going to be jobs when they come out of school, whatever level of school it is, whether it's in secondary school or after university. They don't know that they'll have a job, like many of us have had jobs. 8 out of 10 in low and middle income countries is going to have to be an entrepreneur, and they don't feel that their education has been relevant. They don't feel they're coming out of school knowing how to make a living. So it creates a lot of anxiety and frustration, and it's worldwide. It has it's a little bit different in certain countries, but your generation is saying that during the pandemic, this has been their number one issue. So what people are asking for is a modern education so that they can make a living, and that they want to be connected, that they want to be digitally connected. And it is worldwide. We haven't done it as a world yet. So I think, Nathan, we take this as a to do, that we have to get this accomplished. And we could do this. I know you've been talking about space, but lower satellites can connect every school in the world to the internet. And wouldn't that change this generation? Because every young person would have the same platform that you could learn from. So it's a huge issue. It's a very important one. And to your point about mental health, the mental health and the educational studies are very intertwined, and the thought about who you're going to become, what your life is going to be, how it's going to unfold. And for many, it is a source of great anxiety. But for many of us in humanitarian and development work, we've put young people to work in their communities. They're really excited about it. They feel they're making progress. They don't wonder why they're there. And so we're getting lots more interest in the whole profession of development and humanitarian work, which is great.
That's excellent, and I feel that's a real message, of hope for the future, that there are more young people getting into that development studies. So, do you think that these challenges that we are facing right now will still be prevalent in the next decade? And do you think that we will be able to overcome them with the processes that we have now?
much too slowly, and we don't fund it enough. So anyone who's taking economics or finance should be thinking through public-private vehicles. So usually in the world of humanitarian development affairs, we work on cash, in-kind donations, loans, equity, guarantees, forfeit, but we don't really create a world of easily functioning public and private finance. And yet, none of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are going to be achieved unless we can do public private finance. So that's an immediate issue, and you need it for absolutely every sector. But the two sectors that I think are big accelerators are education, this notion of connecting every school and every learner and every teacher to the internet, I think would be an enormous accelerator. And the second one would be water, because water is both the basis of a good public health system. It is the basis of good food and agriculture systems, and it is an essential part of good stewardship of our planet in climate change. So, water is another very clear accelerator for this next decade. So, if I were you, I'd focus on those two.
Thank you very much for that answer. Just moving on to my next question. There have been many crises affecting children which have come quite unexpectedly, such as the pandemic and also the war in Ukraine. What work is UNICEF doing to prevent future human crises?
Well, the number one is that the hardest thing on children is for countries to be in conflict and at war. It just means that they run and they get separated from their families, or they run with their families, but then they're outside of their communities and outside of everything they know, outside of their school systems, and they may or may not be accepted. So it's very hard on children. Children need peace, and it is the number one thing that we call for. The other thing that just strikes you whenever you're doing this work is that it's a time when you can rethink what are the fundamental values of your country, of your world, and what is it that is really important to you. The pandemic, for many of us, made us closer to our own families because we were at home with them, or closer to our close friends because they were the ones who were there online with us. But when you begin to really think about it, what your belief system is as a young person and who you are close to, what means a great deal to you, that will be the most important area for you to keep checking with yourself, because you'll think differently when you are 12 years old, or when you're 24 years old, or when you're 48 years old. So keep checking with yourself what you believe in, and what you can do to help the world.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. And I believe we'll just be moving on to one final question. And that is, do you think young people can have a larger role in policy towards children? And do you think that policymakers really understand the impacts of their actions on children?
They do not. And partly it is that they're not listening as closely as they could be. I mentioned that you think differently when you're 6 or 12 or 18 or 24. You do. And so some of it is that all of us, as we get older, begin to think that we remember or we know what it was like to be 6 years old and to know what you think about when you're 6 years old. But because we forget, I think it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in that place. And so politicians and policymakers aren't listening to young people enough. And so my advice would be, the last 30 years we have spent advocating for young people's rights and children's rights. This next 30 years, come up with solutions, realize those rights, do community projects, find projects that you want to get involved in, get public-private finance in that, get them at scale. Don't just try to get a little money to make it by, hand to mouth. Get enough to actually solve the problem that you have before you. And young
Thank you so much for joining us at the Warwick Economics Summit. It's been a real pleasure to have you, so thank you so much. And as
my
for the
pleasure.
audience,
Thank you for doing it.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. And as for the audience, can I please request that you stay in the hall for our closing remarks, which will begin shortly. Thank you, everybody.